Chapter 1 of The Country Beyond. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Roger Moline. The Country Beyond by James Oliver Curwood. Chapter 1. A glass of wine once lost a kingdom. A nail turned the tide of a mighty battle, and a woman's smile, once upon a time, destroyed the homes of 1,000,000 people. Thus have trivial things played their potent parts in the history of human lives. Yet these things Peter did not know. The Country Beyond, Chapter 1. Not far from the rugged and storm-whipped north shore of Lake Superior, and south of the Kaministiqua, yet not as far south as the Rainy River waterway, there lay a paradise lost in the heart of a wilderness world, and in that paradise a little corner of hell. That was what the girl had called it once upon a time, when sobbing out the shame and the agony of it to herself. That was before Peter had come to leaven the drab of her life. But the hell was still there. One would not have guessed its existence, standing at the bald top of Cragg's Ridge this wonderful 30th day of May. In the whiteness of winter one could look off over 100 square miles of freezing forest and swamp and river country, with the gleam of ice-covered lakes here and there, fringed by their black spruce and cedar and balsam, a country of storm, of deep snows, and men and women whose blood ran red with the thrill that the hardship and the never-ending adventure of the wild. But this was spring, and such a spring as had not come to the Canadian North Country in many years. Until 3 days ago there had been a deluge of warm rains, and since then the sun had inundated the land with the golden warmth of summer. The last chill was gone from the air, and the last bit of frozen earth and muck from the deepest and blackest swamps, north, south, east, and west, the wilderness world was a glory of bursting life, of springtime mellowing into summer. Ridge upon ridge of yellows and greens and blacks swept away into the unknown distances like the billows of a vast sea, and between them lay the valleys and swamps, the lakes and waterways, glad with the rippling song of running waters, the sweet scents of early flowering time, and the joyous voice of all mating creatures. Just under Cragg's Ridge lay the paradise, a meadow-like sweep of plain that reached down to the edge of Clearwater Lake, with clumps of poplars and white birch, and darker tapestries of spruce and balsams dotting it like the islets in a sea of verdant green. The flowers were 2 weeks ahead of their time, and the sweet perfumes of late June, instead of May, rose up out of the plain, and already there was nesting in the velvety splashes of timber. In the edge of a clump of this timber, flat on his belly, lay Peter. The love of adventure was in him, and today he had sallied forth on his most desperate enterprise. For the first time he had gone alone to the edge of Clearwater Lake, 1/2 mile away. Boldly he had trotted up and down the white strip of beach where the girl's footprint still remained in the sand, and defiantly he had yipped at the shimmering vastness of the water, and at the white gulls circling near him in quest of dead fish flung ashore. Peter was 3 months old. Yesterday he had been a timid pup, shrinking from the bigness and strangeness of everything about him. But today he had braved the lake trail on his own nerve, and nothing had dared to come near him in spite of his yipping, so that a great courage and a great desire were born in him. Therefore, in returning, he had paused in the edge of a great clump of balsams and spruce, and lay flat on his belly, his sharp little eyes leveling yearningly at the black mystery of its deeper shadows. The bit of forest filled a cup-like depression in the plain, and was possibly half a rifle-shot distance from end to end, but to Peter it was as vast as life itself, and something urged him to go in. And as he lay there, desire and indecision struggling for mastery within him, no power could have told Peter that destinies greater than his own were working through the soul of the dog that was in him, and that on his decision to go in or not to go in, on the triumph of courage or cowardice, there rested the fates of lives greater than his own, of men and women and of little children still unborn. A glass of wine once lost a kingdom, a nail turned the tide of a mighty battle, and a woman's smile once upon a time destroyed the homes of 1,000,000 people. Thus have trivial things played their potent parts in the history of human lives, yet these things Peter did not know, nor that his greatest hour had come. At last he rose from his squatting posture, and stood upon his feet. He was not a beautiful pup, this Peter Pied-Bot, or Peter Clubfoot, as Jolly Roger McKay, who lived over in the Big Cedar Swamp, had named him when he gave Peter to the girl. He was, in a way, an accident, and a homely one at that. His father was a blue-blooded fighting Airedale, who had broken from his kennel long enough to commit a mésalliance with a huge big-footed and peace-loving Mackenzie hound, and Peter was the result. He wore the fiercely bristling whiskers of his Airedale father at the age of 3 months. His ears were flappy and big, his tail was knotted, and his legs were ungainly and loose, with huge feet at the end of them, so big and heavy that he stumbled frequently and fell on his nose. One pitied him at first, and then loved him. For Peter, in spite of his homeliness, had the 2 best bloods of all dog creation in his veins. Yet, in a way, it was like mixing nitroglycerin with olive oil, or dynamite and saltpeter with milk and honey. Peter's heart was thumping rapidly as he took a step toward the deeper shadows. He swallowed hard, as if to clear a knot out of his scrawny throat. But he had made up his mind. Something was compelling him, and he would go in. Slowly the gloom engulfed him, and once again the whimsical spirit of fatalism had chosen a trivial thing to work out its ends in the romance and tragedy of human lives. Grim shadows began to surround Peter, and his ears shot up, and a scraggly brush stood out along his spine. But he did not bark, as he had barked along the shore of the lake and in the green opens. Twice he looked back to the shimmer of sunshine that was growing more and more indistinct. As long as he could see this, and knew that his retreat was open, there still remained a bit of that courage which was swiftly ebbing in the thickening darkness. But the third time he looked back the light of the sun was utterly gone. For an instant the knot rose up in his throat and choked him, and his eyes popped, and grew like little balls of fire in his intense desire to see through the gloom. Even the girl, who was afraid of only one thing in the world, would have paused where Peter stood with a little quickening of her heart. For all the light of the day, it seemed to Peter, had suddenly died out. Over his head the spruce and cedar and balsam tops grew so thick they were like a canopy of night. Through them the snow never came in winter, and under them the light of a blazing sun was only a ghostly twilight. And now, as he stood there, his whole soul burning with a desire to see his way out, Peter began to hear strange sounds. Strangest of all, and most fearsome, was a hissing that came and went, sometimes very near to him, and always accompanied by a grating noise that curdled his blood. Twice after that he saw the shadow of the great owl as it swooped over him, and he flattened himself down, the knot in his throat growing bigger and more choking. And then he heard the soft and uncanny movement of huge feathered bodies in the thick shroud of boughs overhead, and slowly and cautiously he wormed himself around, determined